5 minutes before my boss's entire world began to crumble. He laughed in my face and said, "Look at that. The broke girl thinks she can taste wine." My name is Daisy Caldwell, and for the past 3 years I have worked under Grant Maxwell, a man who speaks like every sentence is a spotlight, and everyone else is standing in the dark. I had heard him say worse, but that afternoon his voice carried farther than usual. People actually turned to look at me. He wanted them to. I did not say a word. Grant smirked like my silence proved him right. "Careful, Daisy. Some bottles cost more than your car," he added, eyes flicking over me as if he were assessing a thrift store item someone accidentally brought to a luxury event. One of the investors chuckled politely. Another pretended not to hear a thing. Inside my chest, something tightened, old, familiar, but I held it still. Grant did not know I had been bartending since I was 19, or that I studied enology at night while working 2 jobs. He did not know I had a quiet savings account, or that I had built it specifically for moments when men like him believed I could not possibly exist outside the box they built for me. When the bidding started for the 50-year-old French vintage, Grant stepped forward like a king reclaiming a throne. "This one is mine," he bragged to the cluster around him. "Perfect for our expansion deal. You will see." I waited, 1 minute, then 2. The auctioneer called numbers that made people suck in their breath, but Grant kept bidding, swaggering on fumes of ego and borrowed confidence. And then, at exactly the 5-minute mark, I lifted my paddle. The room froze. Grant's jaw worked like he was trying to swallow something sharp. Someone whispered my name as though they were unsure I should have one. I did not look at Grant. I did not need to. The bottle was declared mine moments later. Everyone thought that was the shock. But the real blow, the one Grant never saw coming, was already waiting for him in the envelope I had left behind. The story you are about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at RevengeAITA. Each narrative explores a different emotional truth, a different turning point, and a different reckoning. No 2 stories share the same message, and none repeat the arc of another. What unfolds next belongs entirely to Daisy, and to the consequences her silence set in motion. Grant's expression was still stuck between confusion and disbelief as I stepped away, leaving the crowd buzzing and my pulse steady. The moment felt less like a victory and more like a door unlocking after years of pressure. Whatever happened next would rise from everything that led me here, and Chapter 2 begins where those years first began to shape me. People at Maxwell and Reinhardt Wines liked to pretend they did not see the way Grant spoke to me. They heard him. They always heard him. But they learned to look past it the same way he expected me to. "Daisy, triple-check the shipment report," he would say, even when he knew I had already done it twice. Or, "Do not speak yet, Daisy. Let the senior team handle this." The senior team meant him. I used to nod and step back because pushing forward only made him sharper. The first week I worked there, he corrected my pronunciation of a French region I had studied for months. "You said it wrong," he insisted. When another analyst gently told him I was right, he brushed it off. Well, she did not sound right. That was how Grant worked if I was correct. He still found a way to make me smaller. Eleanor from accounting once whispered to me, "You should speak more in meetings." Before I could answer, Grant cut across the room. "Daisy speaks when there is something worth adding." I felt Eleanor shrink beside me, even though the comment was meant for me. There was one afternoon when the company nearly lost a deal worth several $1,000,000. A distributor's numbers looked clean at first glance, but I noticed gaps, dates that did not line up, totals that tipped too perfectly. I stayed late, running the math 3 times. The next morning, I handed Grant the corrected projection. "If we move forward with this contract, we will lose money," I told him. He skimmed the report, nodded once, then walked straight into the boardroom. "I caught an error," he announced. "Saved us from a disaster." His eyes slid toward me for half a second. No one else looked to see whether I had written the entire thing by hand the night before. I spent years studying enology at night and pouring drinks in small bars to pay for the courses. But inside that company, I was still the quiet girl who helped and never led. I used to wonder how long a person could swallow disrespect before something finally broke. Looking back, the break had already started. I just had not named it yet. When I arrived at the Napa Wine Exchange that afternoon, the first person who spoke to me did not even ask my name. "Miss, can you wipe these glasses?" a server said, pressing a cloth into my hand. Before I could answer, Grant walked by and laughed. "Do not worry," he told the server. "She is used to taking care of the small jobs." I set the cloth down slowly. The server flushed and murmured an apology. Grant did not. A pair of investors approached him a moment later. "Grant, we did not know Daisy would be here," he shrugged. "Someone must have felt sorry for her. Maybe they had an extra seat." I heard every word. One of the investors looked at me with the same expression people use when they tip a jar. They assume I live off. Grant steered them toward the display table, putting on his performance voice. "This region," he declared, tapping the label on a bottle, "is known for heavy oak and a full-bodied finish." He was completely wrong. The region he named was famous for light, mineral-driven wines. Anyone who had spent even a month studying enology knew that. But the investors nodded politely, unwilling to correct him. I stayed close enough to hear him, but far enough to keep my face calm. Grant looked restless, too eager, too sharp around the edges. His laugh was louder than usual, his hands moving non-stop, as if selling himself mattered more than selling the brand. When one of the donors asked him whether the company planned to expand its European partnerships, he stumbled through an answer, then masked it with bravado. "After I win the French vintage tonight," he said, "our leverage will be unquestionable." I watched him over the rim of my glass, taking in the cracks he thought no one noticed. His desperation clung to every word, every exaggerated gesture, every lie he told with a smile. I started to understand that Grant did not just want the vintage. He needed it. And whatever he needed it for was far bigger than pride. I found out the truth 2 weeks before the auction, on a night when the office was nearly empty, and the only sound was the hum of the old printer Grant insisted on keeping. I had stayed late to finish a quarterly analysis when I noticed a set of reimbursement forms sitting on the shared drive forms Grant had never mentioned to me. The numbers felt wrong immediately. The amounts were too round, the justifications too vague. When I opened the attached receipts, my stomach tightened. They were tied to overseas meetings we never had. They referenced distributors we had not spoken to in over a year. And then I saw a line item labeled Gift Investment, with a projected value equal to the estimated price of the 50-year-old French vintage. The office door opened behind me. Grant stepped in, pretending surprise, burning the midnight oil. "Daisy, good. Someone has to make the numbers look clean." I closed the tab before he reached my desk. "Are these reimbursements finalized?" He waved a hand. "Just routine expenses. Nothing you need to worry about." His tone was light, but his eyes stayed locked on me. Later that night, when I reopened the files, everything clicked. He was using company funds to bribe an overseas distributor. The bottle was not just a luxury, it was leverage. And he had used my previous financial reports rewritten, altered, twisted to justify the purchase. I printed every document and slipped them into a folder I kept hidden at home. After years of keeping my head down, something inside me refused to bend anymore. I contacted a law office in San Francisco and handed them everything. They took the case within days. Back at the auction, watching Grant's forced confidence unravel, I felt the quiet shift inside me again. He had built his entire empire on forged numbers, altered documents, and other people's work. And numbers, no matter how carefully manipulated, always lead somewhere. When the auctioneer struck the gavel to begin, Grant moved forward as if the entire room existed for him alone. "Let us start strong," he announced to no one in particular, lifting his paddle with a flourish. The opening bid landed, and he snapped up the next one before the echo faded. Several investors exchanged glances. One leaned toward him. "Grant, you seem unusually eager tonight," he forced a laugh. A leader acts decisively. People respect confidence, but his hand tightened on the paddle. Another bidder stepped in, a man from a well-known San Francisco wine collective. $30,000, the man called out smoothly. Grant lifted his paddle immediately. $35,000. His words tripped slightly at the end. The rival buyer did not flinch. $40,000. A ripple passed through the crowd. Grant raised his paddle again, then hesitated just half a beat too long. $45,000, the rival countered without blinking. $50,000. Grant's jaw tightened. He gave the investors a quick grin. "He thinks he can intimidate me," he muttered. "Not tonight." But I could see the panic in the way he shifted his weight, calculating numbers he could not say out loud. He needed that bottle. Without it, his deal overseas would collapse. and the forged documents would have nowhere to hide. $55,000, he called out. The strain in his voice cracked through the manufactured confidence. The rival bidder paused, then offered a tiny shrug. $60,000. Gasps spread across the room. Grant lifted his paddle halfway, stopped, and lowered it slowly. His investors watched him, waiting for the swagger, the domination, the final blow he always delivered. Nothing came. Grant Maxwell, the man who talked over everyone, had hit the ceiling he could not afford to admit. I watched him swallow hard as silence replaced his bravado, the air tightening around him like a closing fist. Grant stood frozen at $55,000, his paddle hovering uselessly at his side. The auctioneer scanned the room. "Do I hear $56,000?" Silence pressed in, thick and expectant. Eyes shifted toward Grant, waiting for him to reclaim his authority, to prove that this entire performance was still under his control. He did not move. I lifted my paddle. The motion was quiet, almost gentle, but the effect hit the room like a dropped glass. Heads snapped toward me. A whisper rolled across the aisle. Grant's face drained of color before flushing a furious red. The auctioneer blinked. $56,000 from bidder 21. Grant stumbled a half step forward. She cannot bid that," a man behind him murmured. "Why not?" Grant opened his mouth. But no words came out. The rival buyer lifted an eyebrow, amused. "Are you bidding?" Maxwell. Grant lifted his paddle an inch, then lowered it again. He could not go higher, not without exposing money that was never his to spend. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $56,000, going once, going twice. Grant finally choked out. "This is ridiculous," but the gavel fell before he could recover. Sold to bidder 21. A wave of shock rippled through the hall. Someone near the back muttered, "Daisy Caldwell." Seriously, another whispered, "I thought she made assistant wages." Grant swung toward me, eyes wide, breath shallow. "You have no idea what you just did," he hissed under his breath. "I think I do," I replied. He raked a hand through his hair. "You ruined everything." For a moment, I almost felt the weight of his words, almost, because I knew exactly what the bottle represented. Without it, his bribe had no centerpiece. His overseas deal would collapse, and the forged documents he buried under my old reports would have nowhere to hide. His fear confirmed everything I already understood. My bid had shaken him, but the envelope waiting on his table would do far more. When the auction concluded, people lingered in clusters, murmuring about the upset no one had predicted. I did not stay to hear any of it. I thanked the auction staff, signed the purchase documents, and slipped out through the side door before Grant could recover enough to corner me, behind me. I heard his voice rising, brittle and frantic. "Where is she, Daisy? She cannot just walk out." I kept moving. A staff member approached Grant's table a moment later, a young woman with a hesitant expression. She held a sealed envelope. "Mr. Maxwell, this was left for you. The name on it says, 'For Grant Maxwell, from Daisy Caldwell.' She asked us to make sure you received it." Grant snatched the envelope from her hand. "Of course she did," he muttered. Probably some dramatic apology, or a childish attempt at gloating. The investors around him exchanged uneasy glances. He tore it open. At first, he did not react. His eyes skimmed the page once, then again, then a third time as the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he whispered. One of the investors leaned in. "Is something wrong?" Grant jerked the paper away from him. Inside the envelope was not an apology, not a taunt, not a note. It was a court summons, filed under financial fraud, misuse of corporate funds. My evidence attached, my signature included. And at the bottom, the date of issuance set weeks earlier. Grant staggered back a step. She filed this already." The rival bidder from earlier overheard and let out a low exhale. "Looks like she did more homework than you thought." Grant pressed a trembling hand to his forehead. This cannot be happening, but it was because I had never planned for the auction to be the end. I planned for it to be the moment the truth finally walked into the room. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 8 in the morning, and by 8:02, Grant was already shouting, "She forged everything," he barked, slamming a stack of papers onto the conference table. "These numbers are fabricated. Daisy has been trying to undermine me for months." The board members exchanged glances. None of them looked surprised, only tired. I sat at the opposite end of the table. the folder of original documents resting on my lap. If you believe I forged them, I said quietly, we can start by comparing the metadata. Every file was created on your account. That is impossible, Grant snapped. She hacked Marcus Chen, one of the senior board directors. Cut him off. Grant, sit down. We will review this properly. Grant did not sit, but he lowered his voice. She wants my job. That is all this is. I opened the folder. Here is the expense report you submitted on March 2nd, and here is the same document, the version you altered 2 days later. Your edits appear under your login credentials. I slid the papers forward. The signatures do not match either. Board member Lila Morrison frowned. Grant, you told us these were verified by Daisy. I did, Grant said quickly. She approved those numbers, but in April, I replied, you told the same board I was not experienced enough to handle international projections. The room went silent. Marcus leaned forward. Which statement is true, Grant? That she verified the numbers or that she was never qualified to handle them? Grant opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Nothing coherent came out. The weight of his contradiction settled across the table like a verdict. The board members looked at him with dawning clarity, recognizing the pattern, the manipulation, the desperate lies he could no longer outrun. Grant finally sat down, the fight leaving his shoulders all at once. And for the first time in years, the man who never let me finish a sentence had nothing left to say at all. By the end of the week, Grant's name disappeared from every internal email thread. The board issued a formal announcement he was suspended, barred from accessing any financial systems, and required to appear in court regarding the pending fraud investigation. Investors released their own statement soon after, carefully removing themselves from anything connected to him. I walked through the office the next morning expecting the usual cold nods, the polite silence. Instead, people stopped me in the hallway. Eleanor from accounting touched my arm gently. I always knew you were doing the real work, she whispered. I am glad someone finally said it out loud. Marcus caught me near the elevators. For what it is worth, he said. We should have listened sooner. You carried more than anyone realized. Others did not say anything, they simply gave a small nod when I passed. A quiet acknowledgement that felt heavier than any apology. Grant did not return to the office. His belongings were packed by human resources. Someone said he tried to argue, tried to claim sabotage again, but no one believed him anymore. He had spent years trying to make me invisible. Now he was the one removed from every room. I did not feel triumphant. Relief was not triumph. It was the sound of a long-held breath finally leaving my body. 2 days later, a representative from the Napa Valley Wine Research Institute called. We have followed some of your analytical work, she said. If you are open to it, we would like to discuss a position with significantly more independence than you had at Maxwell and Reinhardt. The offer was real substantial. Others followed. For the first time in years, my future did not feel like something I had to defend. After everything that had happened, everything I had held together in silence, I began to understand that I could finally choose the direction of my own life. Grant stood in front of the judge looking nothing like the man who once filled every room with noise. His suit hung awkwardly, his posture rigid, his confidence erased. The judge read each charge slowly: financial fraud, intentional misrepresentation, misuse of corporate funds. Every sentence landed with the weight of something long overdue. I sat quietly in the back row. My hands stayed still on my lap. I was not here to win anything. I was here to close a chapter I had carried for far too long. When the hearing adjourned, people filed out in a hush. Grant spotted me near the doors and hurried over. Daisy, please, he said, breath uneven. Tell them you misunderstood. You know I never meant for this to happen. I stepped back. Grant, all of this happened because of the choices you made. He shook his head weakly. I can fix this. I just need someone to believe me. You did not lose everything because of me, I said. You lost everything because you believed I did not matter. The words stopped him cold, before he could reach for another excuse. I walked past him and out into the sunlight. Days later, I met with the team from the Napa Valley Wine Research Institute. Their offer was generous, but I surprised myself by turning it down. I had spent years building my voice in the shadows. I did not want to hand it to another company. Instead, I rented a small office near downtown Napa and registered my own wine analytics consultancy. When I told Eleanor, She hugged me so tightly, I laughed. You were meant to lead, she said, not to wait your turn. The first client contract arrived within a week, signed without hesitation. Revenge was never the bottle I bought. Revenge was the woman I finally let myself become. Life lesson. Never believe the people who try to shrink you. Stand long enough, learn quietly if you must. And one day you will step into a life they never imagined you could build.